conversation on matters, International Day of People Living with Disabilities, as well as we commemorate the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And of course, even these people are included. In most cases, these cases go unnoticed or even underreported. So even as we commemorate the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence on women and girls, it is also important to put of importance matters people living with disabilities in order to break the bias that comes when it comes even to the support services when it comes to these people. And to have that conversation, I am joined this morning by my able panelist. My left side, Aaron Green, who is a sustainable development practitioner. I got it right there. Yeah. Then we have Janet Nyongesa, who is a physiotherapist at Paulo's Home. We do have Maggie Odhiambo. She is a gender and inclusion expert. And finally, we have Joseph Owino there, the chair, Gifted Community Center. Ladies and gentlemen, it's good to have you this morning. Let me just start with you, Aaron. Do you feel like that this group is well represented when it comes to matters dealing with the gender-based violence against people living with disabilities?
Yeah, this we have the selection is top-notch, because if you look at the aspects in disability or inclusion space and work, the aspect of work with positives, person living with a form of disability. We have Mr. Owino there. We have the gender issues in disability and inclusion work. We have an expert, and a very key component in disability work is issues about therapy. How are we supporting or managing various disabilities? We have a therapist here, and for me, as one who is in sustainable development aspect or effects of climate change and development, and how persons living with disability are being looked at, and what are the effects of our work in their life, in their work, and in their communities. So it's good.
Okay, great. And Janet, when dealing with these people, even as we are looking forward to commemorating that day on December 3rd, are there any strides that we've made in terms of really including these people, even in terms of decision making and making sure that they're not left out?
Yeah, basically there has been that opportunity whereby persons with disability have been included in decision making, and basically as institutions or organizations that are working with persons with disability, that is what we are really advocating for, that we have to ensure that persons with disability participate in ensuring that their rights are actually, they're given their rights. And for me, basically, I'm working with an institution where we work with children with disability, and so we really emphasize and advocate that, and we really empower caregivers of these children and anybody else surrounding these children with disability, the community. Basically, we are doing so much to empower them, to ensure that rights of children with disability are advocated for. Yeah.
Okay, great. And Maggie, how can we enhance and create awareness more when it comes to matters people living with disability?
Thank you very much. I'll begin by saying that there are so many challenges that person living with disability face when it comes to the ground, the reality on the ground. Because we'll say that socially they're okay, politically they're okay, and maybe economically they're okay. But when you look at what really they go through on the ground, it's totally different. Because we find that socially they are discriminated. Politically, there's no intention of maybe supporting them in different ways. And when it comes to mobility, when it comes to maybe having access to services, when it comes to maybe having access to social amenities, there's so much that needs to be addressed. And at times we even find that the persons living with disability, they're not even aware of where they can get the services, the right services. They go through a lot of violation. And you'll find that the violations that they go through, who is really there to support them? Because is the environment disability friendly? we find that the environment definitely, mostly, is not disability friendly. We just say that this is what they're supposed to be done to. But in real sense, is that happening? When you look at socially, economically, and also physically, how are they? So there's so much that needs to be looked into in terms of awareness. Do they know their rights? Do they know that we have the constitution that spells out and what they're entitled to? Do they really know? Do they really know where they can access what they're supposed to get, like when it comes to social amenities, when it comes to maybe mobility, when it comes to devices that they need to have? Do they know where they can get them? So when it comes to awareness creation, I think there's something that a lot that needs to be done when it comes to awareness creation and letting them just understand where they can get the best services and get the best of from the institutions. Yeah.
And we know how do you think we can, what do you think can be done in order to bridge the gap that comes when it comes to matters inclusion of people living with disability?
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful that I'm here, and thank you for this opportunity. For us to bridge the gap in terms of including persons with disabilities within our various spaces, one thing is empowerment. And empowerment cuts across a number of sectors. First and foremost is to inform these people, get the information. For example, from where I sit, I work closely with the Gifted Community Center, and I also lead a national student union for students with disabilities in the education institutions in this country. One key factor that at least we can use to enhance this aspect is what is the role of education in everything in terms of enabling and bridging the gap persons with disabilities experience, especially within their education. Because we have a challenge in terms of how do we enable transition of learners with disabilities from the lower educational levels to the educational levels. You find that we're grappling with a lot of issues. The same student who's, you see, fees being increased for when getting to campus is also grappling with, high cost of getting the amenities. For example, for the devices that they are supposed to use in their day-to-day lives. This child can't, fend for himself or herself like the others. The parents are also in need because, disability, I always call it a funny, spectrum that doesn't select on your aspect of your status in the society, whether socially, economically, politically, or any other aspect. It won't look at that. It won't say that, oh no, for you, your family can take care of the disability needs, so let me come. For you, your family can't take care of it, so I won't knock in. When it comes, it comes. It doesn't look at any status kind of. And so we must bridge the gap. And from where I sit as a student, we must look into from how do we play a role within the education sector to help churn out persons who can help champion issues about disability inclusion with the bearing from the educational sector, because that is where we have everybody, be it the administrators, be it policymakers, be it those who, even the students themselves. These are people who get to each and every sector of the economy. How do we ensure that even those without disability get to know about disability? Because the last time I checked, disability is not something that you'll say you'll only get it at birth. You can even get it at a later stage of life. And so with that aspect, you get to learn that it can come anytime. Like, for example, we have the Executive Director of the National Council for Persons with Disabilities, Mr. Harun Hassan. This is a person who got to Kenyatta University for his degree. Up to when he got his degree, he didn't have disability. But now he sits on a wheelchair. And he sits as the CEO of National Council for Persons with Disabilities. You find that spectrum. If we can help to educate even those without disability, the need to harness disability inclusion within the society, within a number of sectors, then at least from that we'll be inculcating the aspect of enhancing disability inclusion within the whole society spectrum.
Okay, great, awesome. And how, even as we link now this day to the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, of course this is a group that is not left out, then how prevalent are cases of gender-based violence against people living with disabilities?
My contribution will be around and focused on the SDG, the 2030 Agenda, which is an international development framework. I say the 2030 agenda is an opportunity for people living with disability and also for the disability and inclusion space and work, in that it is committed to the principle of leave no one behind. It's very loud about issues that needs to include persons living with disability. And even in this International Day for Persons Living with Disability, its theme is very clear. Let's unite towards achieving sustainable development goals with, for, and by people living with disability. As Aaron Green, I work for Amani Kibera, which is an organization for people living with disability. In our work, we mainstream inclusion, disability issues in our programming, in our communities where we work. This is very key. As you've talked about the 16 days of activism, people living with disability are a group of people with vulnerabilities and very serious fragilities. We need to, not only as we look at the GBV bet in this 16 days of disability, let's look at groups that are living with fragilities and need to be brought into spectrum and given a lot of prominence. Just like Owino has said, the SDG is coming into work with a rights model, not a medical, not a social or a charity, which so many people have been looking at people with disability or disability work through a charity lens, where they look at them as people only who need to receive. But with the SDG, with specific goals, looks at people with disability as people who've got the right expertise. They're able differently, with the right expertise, right experience, and also competitive enough. So what we are looking at is how can practitioners, communities, governments put into place policies that align to specific goals within the SDG so that we can be able to create opportunities for people living with disability to competitively be into the world economy and societies where they're living. Equally, at the same time, as we look at all these things, climate change has come in as a disruptive phenomena within the development work. It's affecting everything. And in this context, persons living with disability find themselves in very difficult situations because of the effects of climate change. Because one, their responsiveness is always curtailed because of the different impairments that they have. But that needs to be supported, where a lot of focus needs to be put into initiatives for the development organizations. Right policies needs to be there. And like I said, it is a rights model. Being a rights model, it means, and if you look at even in the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disability, Article 32 is very clear that all nations that ratify to this convention need to mainstream their work. Just like in the SDG that talks about, like for example, SDG 4 that talks about access to education and for all people with disability. It's very key, like he says, because we want to bring the expertise of people with disability. How do you acquire expertise? It is in education. So they need to be given those opportunities to be able to actualize in the education levels and push to see persons with all forms of disability in all spheres of academic, in terms of careers. Let them be there. If I may add before I give space, is that this International Day of Persons with Disability, it's an opportunity and also a global conversation platform that needs to create more awareness and understanding. Mm-hmm. That is why I think we are here as part of demonstrations of localizing the SDG and conversations about inclusion at local level. Mm-hmm. So it is very key for us to create more awareness, understand, and equally, not only looking at persons living with disability in the society through this day as commemorating their day, but also celebrate the society that is the fabric that holds them, that supports them. It is the support system. Like George has just brought it. It does not knock on which door that this is an endeared family, we need to knock in this family. This is a less privileged family, we need to do this. All of us need to understand that disability is an open club, that everybody, wherever they are, has got an opportunity to join the club. So if it is an opportunity that any other person can get into, there needs to be safeguards.
Thank you. And Janet, from a psychotherapist point of view, how, when these people undergo cases of violence, how easy or hard is it to deal with the emotional and psychological bit of it, mostly for people now living with disability?
Well, I think I'll give a typical example of cases we are dealing with, especially children with disabilities. And you find that we are dealing with children with disability basically from low income areas, that is the slum. And so mostly you find that these are children, especially the circumstances that led to maybe them being born with disability are circumstances that are surrounding the family. For example, issues poverty, the fact that apart from poverty, maybe literacy. So the fact that the parents, maybe the caregiver, the mother did not have the opportunity to even go and give birth to this child from a hospital setup, like because of money. So you find that in such an environment, especially talking about the slum, you find that there are cases of violence, there are cases of, let me talk about abuse for these children. And you find that number one, most of the time you find that children with disability are mainly maybe abused by maybe people surrounding them. They could be families. And this abuse could be in the case of whereby maybe they are denied their rights in the sense that maybe they are left locked in houses, they are denied the opportunity to access maybe education or even this therapy and all that. And this is because, number one, you find that the families, especially the ones like maybe we are dealing with, you find that these families, maybe it is a caregiver who is, for example, a single mother, and they need to get an opportunity to go out and do something to get some income. And so at some point they have to leave their children in the house locked up. So you find we have had even cases of where these children are abused in cases like you find that maybe a girl is raped and, you know, such like issues. So you find that there's so much of abuse and such like in different aspects, whereby just talking, for example, in the aspect of us providing therapy services, other children are denied the ability to access therapy services. Why? Because you find that, for example, also there are cases where the mothers, the caregivers are very young mothers, you know, they just got a pregnancy and then this happened. They don't even understand what disability is. There is a process of understanding why is my child delaying to sit, walk, the 3-5 years, you know. So you find that now we have to come to a position of empowering them, because you find that even the caregivers, apart from now the community, the people surrounding them, the family, could even be abusing these children without even understanding. So you find that abuses are in different forms. It could be physical, it could be mental, emotional. And you know, these are people who are not able to even express themselves, you know. So because they are not able to speak about the situation, what they are feeling, what they are going through, they don't even have the capacity to ask their caregiver, their mother, to take them to receive these services. We have others, maybe for example, they're having, because of this kind of disability, they're using medication, and because of the situation of the family, they are not, maybe the mother, the caregiver, the family is not in a position to afford the medication. Yet this child, for example, really need the medication. And you know, they don't have maybe the capacity to even, like the children themselves, to express themselves and even see how they are capable, or rather how they can get this medication. So basically what we are saying is that the most important thing is to empower the people, everyone else. everyone else, apart from the person with disability, the caregiver, the family, the community, like everyone needs to get information on how important it is to be able to allow people or persons with disability access their rights. And we're talking about rights to health, rights to education and all that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Janet. But let's take a short commercial break. Of course, when we come back, we'll be having more on this conversation. In case you've just joined us, we're having that conversation on Matters International Day of People Living with Disabilities, as well as how it's linked to the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And you can be part of this conversation by sending us your feedback at TV47 News on X, TV47 Kenya on Facebook. The hashtag is Morning Cafe. And before we went for the break, Maggie was just speaking on the types of the violence against people living with disabilities, and just how hard it is even for these people to report it, because most of them cannot even express themselves. So how then can we make it easy even for them to be able to speak out and speak up when they go through such cases?
Thank you. Number one, what we need to agree on is that people living with disability are at risk of getting any kind of violations. That is number one. And you find that the most people who perpetrate, the perpetrators that cause violations to these persons are just people within the families, the carers, just people within the homes, and maybe people within the neighborhood. They're the ones who give them, who violate them in one way or another. So they go through sexual, physical, emotional abuse. Like you see the way the society discriminates them, the way they're treated, the way they're discriminated in the community. So there are so many violence that they go through, like the sexual, the rest that I've talked about. But when we talk about reducing GBV, there are strategies in which we need to look at. We have the prevention strategy. Prevention strategy is all about awareness creation. Do these people understand that when they're violated, what are they supposed to do? Where are they supposed to go? Do they understand the service, the service providers, do they understand? Do they know that we have the Constitution which protects them, like the 2003 People Living with Disability Act, 2003, Article 14 that protects them, and also the Article 54 that protects them? Do they understand that they are entitled to all those rights? They're entitled to safe roads. They're entitled to an environment that is free from any barriers of violation or any kind. Do they understand that? So that is the aspect of prevention, where they need to understand where can they get the services. Do they understand where they can report? Do they understand what they can do when they're violated in one way or another? Then the other aspect is response. When you're talking about gender-based violence, for us to reduce it, we need to understand the aspect of responding. Do they understand that do you have institutions that are disability-friendly when it comes to them once they've been violated? Where can they get to? These institutions, are they disability-friendly? Like, we look at the police station. Is it disability-friendly? We do have safe houses for these disability persons when they're violated? Do we have the aspect of economic empowerment to ensure that they don't go back to those, don't go back to maybe states or where they were violated? Another aspect is mitigation. Are there spaces where we can prevent and ensure that these people are not being violated? So we need to look at those aspects to ensure that we are saying that these persons that are living with disability, they are safe, they're in a safe environment, they can access all that they need when it comes to maybe getting justice when they're violated in one way or another. So that is very important. Yeah.
Okay, great. And we know even as we speak on matters, even creating awareness and also dealing with the imbalances that come with when people living with disability are concerned, there's a lot of stigmatization in the communities around people living with disability. So then how, even in your personal capacity, how do you ensure that the society is well aware and also reduce inequality between when it comes to people living with disabilities, and also reduce the stigmatization that just comes with it, even for children mostly?
One thing that we always say is that, from the word disability, you remove the first three words, the first three letters, the DIS. What do you remain with? Ability. Ability. Yeah. So that means that we have ability and disability. And from where I come from, I've led, from the time I got my disability, I am also, a person who didn't, I wasn't born with disability. And so I got it while growing up, while still a toddler. And so whatever, I always say is that it comes forth, yes, as an impairment kind of, but there's always a turnaround in all this. And from where I say I've led my life nearly up to this point, my primary school, the better part of it, up to even my high school, I spent my time in the rural. And I saw the real experience where there's lack of information, you don't have access to resources, you can't know, you don't even know the right door to knock, on how to get assisted as a person's ability, into how to get the assistance that is according to person's abilities. And again, for those people who think they know on the issues that are on the mitigation measures that are preserved for person's abilities, they give you the information which is also not right. So you're suffering, you lack the right information, and even that information which you're given is also not, can't even help. So you find yourself in a situation that you can't access that which is set for you as an individual. And so that is where like the imbalance comes from. And so from my own perspective, and why I've come forth, because I want to bridge that gap. I've led my life up to this point as a youth and as a student with disability. I've seen the challenges growing up. And one of the issues is accessing education. You know, for me, yes, it's been easy because I can say I could get to a school just like any other student who has or has no disability and sit in class, work out with them. But how is that child who needs extra resource, extra facility, so that he or she can sit in class? And that facility is not readily available. It is expensive. The family can't afford it. They have to depend on a well-wisher who, like again, sometimes can't avail everything, because getting, let's say, for example, a wheelchair, a weight cane, and all other kind of materials is just the first way, like to bridge the gap. Secondly is, how can, like this child or this person with disability acquire information the way I also acquire it, without any prejudice or any, like impediment caused by my disability. It is from bridging those gaps. And so from the background where I come from, especially from the educational perspective, that is why I'm like bringing up like champions within the universities, so that at least we go back to the rural. Because for us even to have many more persons with disabilities in the decision-making organs, it is not just about bringing them up as persons with disabilities. We must build their capacity from an educational point of view, from a skill set point of view. Because I believe, and we're having the discussions, the theme of this year's celebration of the International Persons with Disabilities Day celebration will be United in Action to Rescue and Achieve SDGs for, by, and persons with disabilities. This is a testament that we must build the nexus between disability inclusion and the SDGs. And for us to enhance this awareness, the media is a focal point here. So that at least that person who couldn't get a point here can only be accessed through this information now and even later, so that at least we help to impart the community. As I sit here, I am an International Olympic Committee young leader. I'm into the platform because it's a platform that is set for young leaders globally who have sporting ideas that can be used to harness community development. This is a program that I showed interest because personally I'm a sports person. I do para taekwondo, and I'm in the country's national team. Apart from that, I said no, I must get out of the ring because I'm into sport and I've seen the challenges my colleagues who have disability are grappling with in terms of getting to the mainstream sporting arena. They have the talent, they have the potential, but they don't have the leeway. And I must come as a bridge to ensure that gap works out. And so this, the IOC-led program is hinged on SDG. How do you package your idea with the SDG discussion and use it to harness community development? And so for me was to use sports and the bit of parasports to champion for issues about education, because I want to see a community where the transition, especially within the educational space, for learners with disabilities, both from within the basic educational levels to the high educational levels, and even from high educational levels to the workplace. Because we must have that turnaround discussion. How do we build the capacity of persons with disability? Because even coming here, when Madam mentioned about Article 54 of the Constitution, Clause 2 provides for issues about reservation of job opportunities for persons with disabilities, capped at 5%. I can't come even to TV for 7 years to be employed because I have disability. I must give you the papers, and the papers denote qualification or skill set. So we must go back if we want to empower persons with disabilities. How do we harness the skill set function? How do we enhance their knowledge capacity so that whenever we churn these people to the decision-making arena, they are not the flower girls and the flower boys, yes, but rather they help to mitigate issues. They help to fast-track policies that get to help persons with disabilities in the long term. Mm-hmm. And that is why, for me, GCC, the Gifted Community Center, comes out as an elaborate framework, an elaborate team that has helped to bring together the voices of young persons with disabilities so that it can stem around the aspect of disability inclusion from the youth perspective, because we have a future that is before us. We can't leave it to others to chart our path forward for us. We must be part of the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. Amazing. And Aaron,
Yes.
when you speak, you mentioned Kibra, and when I look at these issues, mostly people in the rural areas are left out and people in the slums also. Well, Kibra could access these resources because it's within the urban environs here, but there's that kid there in Turkana or even Tana River somewhere, and they have a disability, and most of the time, these resources and even information do not get to them, and even they have no idea how to even seek medical attention when it comes to this. So how do you ensure there's inclusivity and equitable share of resources and even revenue when it comes to these cases, even as you forge towards achieving the sustainable development goals?
Thank you for bringing that angle. And from what you said, you talked about Kibra, which is an informal settlement. So we talk about informal settlements within urban settings. You've talked about rural settings, the child in that rural setting. As a development practitioner who is mainstreaming SDG and pushing for the alignment of development work, this, I'm talking about design, programming, and data in bringing in people living with disability in realizing sustainable development. The SDG, I said previously, is an opportunity because it is committed to the principle of leaving no one behind. As an organization, Amani Kibera, where we work in the informal settlement of Nairobi, our office being in Kibera. Informal settlements have a lot of challenges. There's a lot of social pathologies that needs to be mitigated. And it happens that people with disability are also in these communities, they're also in these settlements. What happens is, just like what the theme says, we need to unite towards achieving the sustainable development goals with, for, and by people with disability. In development work, we push so much, and it's very key for us to look at in the designing of mitigative programs. Yes, how are people living with disability meaningfully involved, not only in receiving, being beneficiaries, but how are they going to sit in those tables where conversations around development work is being made? What is their contribution from an expertise point, from their experiences, from the challenges in the societies that they are in? So it is very important for us and imperative for people in the development work to broaden their scope in the aspects of creating awareness, policy, lobbying for the right policy, aspects of designing programs with people living with disability meaningfully involved in their knowledge systems. This one we're talking about communities, information and support system that they have. For example, I would say this. Development today is envisaging sustainability. And sustainability is about conservation. And communities that we live in have always had systems.
Sure.
Like, for example, you talk about in rural settings, like in Turkana. The Turkana have their systems through which they were handling disability. All that we need to do is to look at the best practice in this. Another thing is for us to push for a policy that will create more resilient urban settings that have what we call facilities that are accommodative of persons living with all forms of disability. Are the buildings accommodative? Are the institutions accommodative? Are the people living with disability involved in societal development and also government? And in aspects of leadership and governance, are they in that space? So what sustainable development is calling for through the SDG, which we're talking about to unite, to create and achieve that, is for us to have policies that are sound enough, programs that are sound enough, that bring people, persons with disability, not only as vulnerable people, but people with equal abilities, but differently, people who've got expertise, just like George said, and also organizations that work for and of, like GCC, Shofco, Paulo's Home, and Amani Kibera, we also need to bring in our work aware of the rights of people with disability. We need to move away from the charity model where people with disability are always looked at people on the receiving end. We also need to look at them as people with equal opportunities, equal expertise, that are competitive enough, only that they need a little bit of some extra in their day-to-day life, which is the aspect of assistive devices, which the government at this point should bring in an aspect of waivers, because it is not easy, it is expensive for them. So in everything that we're doing, there needs to be a serious emphasis and focus on the rights of people with disability in all things that we do.
Thank you so much for that contribution. And Janet, when it comes to even supporting the survivors as a community, how do we ensure that we empower them to access not only legal, but also medical treatment and also mental health services?
Well, basically, we have different forms of empowerment. And as I said, this depends whether they are persons with disability or rather maybe children with disability, for example. And maybe speaking specifically about children with disability, you find that the different forms of empowerment and this starts with the caregivers of these children. As I said earlier on, you find that there are still caregivers who are still struggling with the fact that they have a child with disability. And so some of them have not even accepted that fact. They don't know how to handle, they don't know how to take care of their child. So we start by providing knowledge to them. What is disability? What is this condition that your child is having? What is cerebral palsy, for example? So by the fact that this caregiver understands what cerebral palsy is, then they're able to know how to handle, how to care their child. They know the needs of their children in terms of medical needs. They know the emotional needs. They know how to communicate. They know how to interact, socialize with their child. They know the rights of this child. And so they know how they would ensure they're included in the community in terms of, for example, education and all that. So number one, it starts with providing knowledge on basically what disabilities or rather the conditions or whatever, if it's an adult, for example, a person with disability, what much about the condition. So, and then apart from that, as I said, these parents or rather the caregivers or persons with disability, others are still struggling rather in the process of accepting the condition. And so you find that psychosocial support is very important, counseling and psychosocial support. So you find that these caregivers, for example, they really need counseling to be able to know how to process the emotions of having, for example, a child with disability, having, or if it's a person, an adult with a disability, you need to start somewhere. I'm just thinking about cases, for example, spinal injury. I remember years back when I went to work there as a physiotherapist. You find that there's so many accidents. That's why we are saying that anyone is a candidate of this club, you know. So you find that you would see some young people who had gotten an accident, and so they have a spinal injury, and so helping them to start processing, because this was a person who was walking and then the next minute, because of the accident, they're not in a position to walk and all that. So they really need emotional support, counseling, psychosocial support and all that for them to be empowered enough to be able to know how to process and even live with the disability. So basically, it's generally different forms of empowerment, starting with providing knowledge, counseling, psychosocial support. Economic empowerment is very important because you find that, for example, talking about families that are living in informal settlement, in slums, and even not necessarily even informal settlement, but people need to be empowered economically, because the burden of raising a person or rather a child with disability, or basically the needs of a person with disability, are very high. So you find that there are, for example, others that are using medication, and these medications are very expensive. So, and you find that especially in this current economic status, you find that people are struggling even to afford that medication. medication, and find that this medication, for example, for this child is very important. If they miss it one day, they regress. And so at some point, for example, now for us doing the therapies, the process is affected because this child is not able to get the medication. So talking about that is generally providing empowerment in all aspects to ensure that these persons are able to, or rather to generally to be able to improve the well-being and provide quality life of persons with disability.
Yes.
Yeah.
Given as we speak on supporting these survivors and people living with disability, you'll find in most cases they're health practitioners, law enforcement officers, or even people who have to deal directly with these people. But yes, they're there and they know that they need to attend to these people, but then there's no training that is tailored towards the needs of these people. So how do we bridge that gap?
I think the most important thing is we need policies that protect persons living with disability when it comes to aspect of social, political, economic. Because we find that when you get to social, there are lots of discrimination. When you get to political, interests of these persons living with disability is never met. When you get to economic, like when it comes to decent work, we're talking about the SDGs. Yes. The SDG number, I think 10 talks about decent work. Right. And we also have the issue of the SDG number 8 that talks about gender equality. And there is 9 that talks about their rights, equality in all spheres. So when we need to bridge that, we need to ensure that we're having policies that govern these, policies that are straightforward to ensure that all this happens. At the end of the day, we'll say that when it comes to issues of violations, because I said persons living with disability, they need to be comfortable at all spheres. Are they comfortable? Are they okay, maybe to get to an institution to get support? That is number one. So when it comes to devices, can they access the devices? Do you have a policy that ensures that if people in an informal, if you have people living with disability in a certain informal settlement, can they get support from maybe social amenities? Can they get support from systems when it comes to maybe education? Can they get support from maybe systems when it comes to issues of economic empowerment? So at the end of the day, we need policies that govern, and we also need to ensure that awareness creation when it comes to the carers, because at times we find that the carers are the ones who cause more harm to persons living with disability. They have knowledge on how they can take care of the persons living with disability. In institutions, is there the issue of intersectionality, whereby everybody is brought on board? Like when we're having an institution, do we have people living with disability in those institutions that are also working there? The inclusion aspect. When it comes to maybe the systems, when you're talking about justice, the police stations, the courts, and all those institutions. Because at the end of the day, we are saying when somebody is violated, that person needs to get justice. We have persons that represent these people living with disability, maybe persons living with disability, person in all those spheres. Is there inclusion in all the aspects? So when we're having policies that govern us, it's very easy for us to ensure that these persons are comfortable. Yes. When it comes to they're comfortable socially, they're comfortable in aspect of economic, and also they're getting decent work conditions when they're working in the spheres of institutions and working places.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And Joseph, just in a nutshell, how do you think then human rights organizations can partner even with groups that fight against violence against people with disabilities in order to ensure that there's a comprehensive approach to address this issue?
Thank you for this. I think the National Council of Disabilities was formed up after the President assented to the Persons with Disabilities Act in 2003. That act is under amendment now. It has been brought to the floor of the Parliament by the majority leader. That means it's a state-backed bill. And so from this aspect and angle line is that the players within the human rights division of spectrum, led by the National Council, we have the Kenya National Commission for Human Rights, should bring on board all players, because especially we have the framework of OPDs, organizations of persons with disabilities, both within diverse settings of that handle persons with disabilities, be it in the rural, be it in the urban, everywhere in every county, so that at least we have that module in terms of operation. How do we enhance the issues about tracking human rights and like seeing how we also work in terms of how do we mitigate the issues of violence against persons with disabilities. And this also looks into how do we also engage with the security forces, because they are number one alarm, like whenever these issues arise, these are the police. And like the disability issues are coming up in different frameworks, because there's a time I was part of an engagement that I was part of the team facilitating an engagement with the police officers. You find that they even don't know. They only think that when a person with disability is only that person who is on a wheelchair or is a person who's walking on a crutches. And there's an aspect also for invisible disabilities. In the education institutions, we also have learning disabilities. You get that? So the aspect of how do we create the awareness within diverse spectrum, because these are people who use force. Because 1, 2, they try to communicate to you, you don't respond, they think no. You don't want to speak, so they approach you through the force issues, force-based approach. And these curtails issues about how whatever even the Constitution guarantees of fair hearing. How do you enhance that? That person who's deaf, how do you understand that this person is deaf? Let me handle him this way. This person is visually impaired or has low vision. How do we tackle it this way? So that at least we get to educate and inform the society that we have diverse disabilities. These are how we can mitigate each and every spectrum of disability that we get to meet. Yeah, so that is.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for creating time. Maggie Odhiambo, gender and inclusion expert. We have Aaron Green, sustainable development practitioner, Janet Nyongesa, physiotherapist at Paulo's Home, as well as Joseph, who is the chair, Gifted Community Center. It's been a pleasure having you, and of course having this conversation, quite enlightening, and I do hope